let's talk about Elliott Carter, because he's also an important composer for you too. Musicians and conductors, especially, it seems, really love Elliott Carter. James Levine did a great deal of, well, or would have done had he not been ill, but it was programmed for Tanglewood this past summer. Musicians and conductors like Elliott Carter. Public, not quite so sure just yet, maybe. What is the thing about Carter that, and why can't we get it if you've got it?
You know, I gave a really long interview to Justin Davidson, and we had a great conversation about Carter. And my son, who was at high school, brought back the article, and I heard from all sorts of people, you know, that I had said it's like watching a play in a language you don't understand, and then, you know, the line followed, and he meant it as a compliment. And I was thinking, oh, Elliott's never going to talk to me again. But in fact, one of the things that I think happens whenever we engage with a cultural work that has the level of art, meaning that it can sustain repeated viewings or hearings, it has a multi-layeredness that does not reveal itself on first appearance. That's a sort of a thumbnail description of what art is, but, you know, we'll go with that for a moment. Whether it's a piece of literature, whether it's a painting, whether it's a piece of music, in a sense, as Proust remarked, it's the only real voyage of discovery that we can make, because we suddenly see with someone else's eyes if it's a painter, hear with someone else's ears if it's a musician, or, you know, voyage with the mind in another place if it's a writer. It's like borrowing that person's brain. And one of the fascinating things about Elliott is that he's like a radio receiver that is constantly attuned to all sorts of frequencies at the same time. So having a discussion with him can go in any direction. I was talking with him about 10 years ago, and I was telling him that I was doing Berriot's new music theater piece, which Berriot didn't like to call an opera, but was to all intents and purposes an opera. And I said, you know, it's about the Ulysses theme, and I said it's called Utis. And then, you know, Elliott, who's taught Greek, said, oh, that means no one. That's when he replied when he was in front of Polyphemus. And I said, yes. And I was all crestfallen because I was getting ready to tell him all this. And of course, he already knew. And so one of the things that happens with Elliott is that his way of viewing how music can be put together, how music in the past was written, how this then influences what he thinks of as writing interesting music, is something that I don't know, really, if it will ever have a great big public. I mean, I'm not sure if the kids in 2112 will be bopping to, you know, the Symphony for Three Orchestras. It's possible, but I'm not sure that that's what it's, I'm not sure that that's what he's really about. I think what he is about is wanting to write really fascinating music. And he does. I brought in an example because, you know, Steve Martin always said, talking about music is like dancing about architecture. Here's the Empire State Building, and now the Chrysler Building. And so there is a sense in which, you know, talking about it is one thing, but I thought it will be interesting if you can hear some of the poetry. William Carlos Williams is the poet for the three movements of Rewaking. And it takes its title from the first song of Rewaking. But the last song is called Shadows. And there are a number of things in it that are really fascinating in the way that he sets it. The text starts out with shadows cast by the streetlight under the stars. The head is tilted back. The long shadow of the legs presumes a world taken for granted, on which the cricket trills. The hollows of the eyes are unpeopled. Right and left climb the ladders of night as dawn races to put out the stars. That is the poetic figure, but we know better. What is not now will never be. Sleep secure. Now, the number of images in a poem like that are so vast that you would think it would be impossible to set. But one of the things that's interesting for Elliott is, how do we make this meaningful music? And so what he first does is starts out with a sort of chordal background before the voice comes in. And it's almost all entirely made up of augmented chords. This is going to, you'll have to pan the camera. And I don't play piano, but an augmented chord, a normal, it's not locked, how great. A normal major triad would be, augmented means that this major third is followed by another major third. Now, that chord is nice, but we have no idea where it might go. And so what Elliott does is he takes that particular sound, and to give this idea of shadows that stretch very far, but clearly at nighttime in the street lamp and under the stars, he spreads the chords out very far. So he'll have, and sometimes even, so you'll have that sound which is both consonant, it's made up of two of our most consonant intervals, the major third, and yet at the same time, it doesn't necessarily lead any place. And so like shadows that seem fairly clear until you look at them and try and grasp them, the music is exactly paralleling this before you hear the voice. Now, one of the things that you hear about with Elliott Carter is that the music has got a lot of rhythmic difficulties, and frequently there's a misunderstanding. There's a great deal of rhythmic complexity going on, but it's not necessarily there for the audience to appreciate, oh, look how complex it is rhythmically. It's actually to try and grasp something that we see all the time around us.